And then often you get that misconception, especially from security people, saying like, yeah, with privacy, we cannot do it because we do security. And to do security, we want to have all the information, and we want to have strong authentication and access control and all of that. And privacy will conflict that, while it's not true. Well, sometimes you will need to look for a trade-off, but it can coexist, and it should coexist, and it actually strengthens each other.
Welcome to the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape, an API discovery and security platform. Today, my guest is Kim Wuyts, a leading privacy engineering expert with over 15 years of experience in security and privacy. Before joining PwC Belgium as manager of cyber and privacy, Kim was a senior researcher at KU Leuven, where she led the development of an extension of LINDDUN, a popular privacy threat modeling framework. Kim is also a co-author of the Threat Modeling Manifesto, program co-chair of the International Workshop on Privacy Engineering, and a member of ENISA's working group on data protection engineering. She is a frequent speaker at international privacy and security conferences, and what I truly love about Kim's presentations is that she raises privacy issues in a fun, entertaining way that really sticks with the audience. Quick special announcement for the Elephant in AppSec. In November, we are hosting the first Elephant in AppSec virtual conference. Join us and hear from speakers who aren't afraid to share their strong opinions. But now, back to this episode. In this episode, we talk with him about how privacy used to be a part of security because security professionals cared about data, how they need now to coexist, and what impact AI will have on privacy. And there is much more. This episode is perfect if you want to know what your car can collect about you and where to get started in investing in your privacy engineering skills so you don't fall behind. Dive right in. Hi, Kim. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. We met, I think, just 2 months ago right now at the RSA and the Chris Romeo's party. So it was, I'm very happy that actually I have met you, and I had a great time there. To be honest, it was probably one of the RSA parties I've enjoyed the most. Even if it was, not a huge party, with dancing, etc. But it was so nice.
Yeah, exactly. We actually got to talk and connect with people, and
so that was super nice. But you've been traveling, I saw quite a lot within the recent months. You presented at the RSA, at OWASP Lisbon, Threat Modeling Con, I think you've been to. So been super busy with a lot of presentations, and I've actually went through your RSA presentation as well, and I think it was actually I didn't know much about privacy because I always talk about application security. I get to meet a lot more penetration testing, threat modeling I hear a lot. That's definitely a hot topic, but I think privacy is something everyone starts to understand more and more that it's very important. I just had literally 2 hours ago conversation with someone said security and privacy, and we shouldn't forget about privacy. So you can see that actually in mind of people it's getting very important topic. And in your presentation I think you put a statement of a kind of icon in AppSec broker Sean Hill, so that the privacy used to be a part of security because security people cared about data. And actually, why did you decide to put the statement?
Yeah, well, first of all, Brooke is my spirit animal. He's the hero of many of us. So I was so excited that I was chatting with him about the RSA presentation, and he was actually explaining to me I don't know why it kind of drifted apart, because way back when I started working, or when I was working on security, we also did privacy. We just didn't call it privacy necessarily, but we cared about data. We wanted to protect it. But then, somehow people got more focused on that specific part and started to see that maybe we need a bit of a different perspective on how to tackle that. And it kind of slowly drifted away, became its own field. And then I think it got absorbed by GRC, by compliance, by legal people for a big part. And those got a bit detached from each other. While I get it, and compliance is important, and it's awesome that we have legislations like GDPR who are kind of the stick to make people consider privacy and data protection. But, well, we still need to bring it back into development, because the end goal is to build that system that is privacy aware, privacy respecting. And then often you get that misconception, especially from security people, saying like, yeah, with privacy, we cannot do it because we do security. And to do security, we want to have all the information, and we want to have strong authentication and access control and all of that. And privacy will conflict that, while it's not true. Well, sometimes you will need to look for a trade-off, but it can coexist, and it should coexist, and it actually strengthens each other. Both security strengthens privacy, because obviously you need confidentiality, but also privacy strengthens security, because, well, if you minimize data, for instance, from a privacy perspective, if there would be a security breach, that impact would be less problematic, because, well, you have less data anyways, because you took care of that minimality concept way upfront, and are concerned about your users and your data subjects.
And why do you think it diverged, so much, and now?
Well, that's a good question. I do think, and you see it has the same foundation. That's also why I like to always talk again about threat modeling, because it's basically the same for security and privacy. You just need a bit of a different mindset. But it's because of that different mindset, I think, that it's drifted away a bit, because from a security perspective, we want to protect our own assets. We want to protect our company, our data.
Yeah.
But from a privacy perspective, you need to put on another hat and think about the data subjects, the individuals. And yeah, that requires a different way of looking at the system, because maybe you're not that much concerned about the individuals if you are wearing that security hat, while from a privacy perspective, you should. It can work together. You just need to be aware of that difference.
And how can you actually educate yourself to be aware of the difference? Because
educate to be aware. Good question. Well, we do have a great training on that, but
link, after.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think what is most important to know is that, like, you have the CIA triad for security, confidentiality, integrity, availability. You also have a triad for privacy, which is unlinkability, transparency, and intervenability, or I like to call it control, because intervenability is a long, difficult word. So I think if you just know those 6 properties, those 6 requirements, categories, that you basically cover the entire range of security and privacy. So security, we know, CIA. Privacy means you want to minimize information. You want to make sure that it's not getting linked and thereby re-identified, or you are getting profiled. So that's about minimality and reducing information and reducing linkage. Then there's transparency, making sure that the individuals at stake are informed about what's happening with their information, because maybe you're collecting all kinds of information, but I don't know it. And, well, it's my data, though from a legal perspective, it's not my data, but it feels like it's my data because it's about me, so I should be informed about it. And the control, the intervenability part, means that if you are processing my information, then I have the right to know what you're doing with it, who has access to it, and I should be able to control certain parts, like on social media, you can say who will be able to see your information, in which ways are the data being processed. It gets a bit tricky on how far that control goes, but still there are things that you can do, request information on what's happening with your information.
Yeah, for sure. Like, how is it used?
Deletion. Again, you cannot just ask your bank saying, well, I just transferred 1,000 euros, but you know what? Forget about it. Just refund it. That's not going to work, of course. But if there's like outdated information, then you have the right to ask for rectification or deletion.
Yeah, and like it was like speaking about information, that how it's used. It's for sure, like you had also one interesting example that I kind of went down the rabbit hole when I started to read
Yeah.
about that, about the information about what kind of, car, what kind of information your car collects about you, and also surrounding cars, like Tesla that collects information. There are some stories on the internet about, Tesla filming, let's say, country next to the car because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
filmed. Yeah, and kind of I didn't realize that at all, like how much the information gets collected by the world kind of around us. I think there it was probably like 22 car brands or something like that. I don't remember exact numbers, but they kind of mentioned that they create also assumptions about you based on the data that collect, like how much time you spend in the car, how much what you do, even like sometimes your temperature, are you sick, and like it's so crazy like that all of this information is just available. And the fact, I think the craziest part, that you don't even realize it because, well, when you usually sign the documents, I think it's a problem of everyone. You don't look at everything that's been said, and especially when it's like third parties, we have a social media with all the ads that you have, like everything that if it's transferred, basically all your behavior can be manipulated with that. And yeah, we always think when it's a bit late when it's too late about that topic. And you can a very big advocate of privacy by design. So how can we actually start thinking upfront and get into that state of privacy by
Yeah.
design?
Yeah, so indeed, the car example, when I was reading it, it was like, this is scary. I want to share that like in my presentations. I need to add a nuance because that study showed what was in the privacy notice. So they say they can collect it. They don't necessarily collect it, but still there's so much information that they can collect. And there was actually this New York Times reporter, Kashmir Hill, who's like known for all the privacy research she does, who also found out that cars are spying on people.
Yeah.
And then she actually found out that her own car that she recently bought was also doing that and was selling that to third-party service without her realizing. So she checked, and the car salesman basically snuck a paper in the documentation for her to sign it. While she was such a privacy aware person, she didn't even notice. And she asked, and it was like, yeah, part of their policy, they are being forced basically to have their customers sign that for, yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
it's all very, very scary. So how can we get into a state of privacy by design? Yeah, currently it's often very much up to the user, which is definitely not a by design kind of approach.
No.
What is one thing that we as users can do, that is being more vocal about our rights and ask for it and choose for the most privacy friendly option. I'm not great at that either because, well, people are lazy and you just use what is available and what works. So it's tricky. The good thing is that we have more and more legislations like GDPR and California privacy regulation, Canada, all around the world. So we also see that more and more fines are being handed out when there's violations. So I hope that that will trigger more and more companies to really invest in it. I see that most companies are still mainly focusing on the low-hanging fruits, unfortunately, and updating their privacy notices and getting consents for newsletter spam.
Yeah.
But I also see some really great privacy engineering, privacy by design approaches by the very big companies, but also by smaller ones who see privacy as that competitive edge. And I think that those are the very interesting companies to follow from, well, my perspective.
Do you have
And
the
how?
name?
Sorry?
Do you have any specific names that you can communicate? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Um it's so the ones who have the biggest privacy engineering teams are the ones you always hear in the news that have privacy issues. So it's not necessarily representative, but like at Meta, at Google, at Uber, at Netflix, I know they all have very great privacy engineering teams. That doesn't mean you never hear about Meta or Google in the privacy news.
Yeah.
But they do have a lot of people working on that and doing a great job. And in privacy communities, that always are very interesting presentations that they can share, because they have the resources and research to actually do really cool things there. So I think they are kind of at the forefront. But I also see more local SMEs, companies in retail, in finance, who do a great effort to invest in privacy and go beyond those basic compliance requirements, and are not just reactive, but really want to do their best in investing and bringing that into their design. Actually, I see more and more companies making that shift and saying like, okay, we're doing this for security anyways. We need to do that from a compliance perspective. Let's just really implement it. Let's take it, well, not take it away from from GRC, from compliance,
Yeah.
but let's also work together and bring that in the more technical angle, because that's the only way you can do it, right? I mean, you can't have a lawyer secure your system. You can't have a lawyer make sure your system is fully privacy aware. I love privacy lawyers, but they can't do everything. We need privacy engineers. We need to have privacy and security by design, and they really go hand in hand.
And how do you think you can persuade, these technical teams, development teams, or I'm not sure if it starts, top to the bottom, or sometimes maybe bottom to the top, but how can you kind of try to find someone within the team who would be interested in that, or how can you persuade them to actually, integrate it in their development?
Yeah, I think both angles will work, and you will need to find a way to persuade all layers, basically, right? So from a business level, C-level, it's more about reducing the fines, reducing the risks, improving the development, basically, because if you do it by design, it's much cheaper than if you add security or privacy later on. So it's about those things that you will need to bring across from the development perspective onward. I think the most important part there is that you show that it doesn't provide overhead, or not much overhead. Same for security. I think that's still an ongoing process for security too, having guardrails and paved roads and checklists and I don't know, all those things that you can provide from a security perspective. The same things apply also for privacy, though privacy is a bit less mature. So there aren't that many solutions out there, like or guidelines even for that developer perspective. Privacy often comes from that legal part, so there is often that mismatch between, okay, we have this high level requirement of make sure it's unlinkable, but what does that mean for a developer? So that's a very interesting thing still to explore further and develop. But yeah, I think the most important thing to get buy-in is that you don't focus on full compliance, because compliance is this thing that makes everybody go crazy. And I've heard a lot of people saying, yeah, okay, but what does it mean? And we got into this rabbit hole of how far should I go? And then I got stuck and I decided, well, I'm just going to do nothing because it's too complicated. So whatever you can do, whatever you can add, like stealing Isar Terendash and Chris Romeo's reasonable security concept, it's the same for privacy. Focus on reasonable, focus on what you can do, what is enough for your situation. Whatever you can add is already better than what you weren't doing before. So if you just build on that and extend, and basically the first advice I always give for people who just want to get started, like if you add a new feature, a new user story, a new whatever, a new system, ask yourself the question, do I really need all the data for this new feature, for this new process? Probably you don't, or maybe you can do it in a different way. Maybe you can do it in an aggregated way for the data, or a de-identified way, or just less data, or don't save it or store it for too long. That reflection on that data, do I need it? That's like the first step that will trigger everything. And if you go from there, then you already have that privacy mindset in your design and development system, and you can start from there.
And how do you integrate it, in kind of the company's culture? Because, for example, I've been like through the process where it indeed like changed for like you had access and had access to the company to a lot of different data, and then because of more and more putting actually focus on that privacy, we started based on the department within the company. It started like we kind of lost access to some part of the data, or it was, as you said, yeah, anonymized, or like in, and sometimes it created some friction. So how do you make sure that actually, within the culture of the company, everyone understands the importance of that privacy design?
Yeah, you have really great questions.
I just think from the experience.
Yeah. No, but it's that's the thing, right? We have been living in this let's collect everything and just keep it, because who knows, in 5 years or 10 years we might need like this teeny tiny bit of information from it,
Yep.
and we might have something to use for it. Obviously, from a privacy perspective, that's not the way to go, because you can only collect what you strictly need, and you cannot use it for a different purpose, actually. So if you collect it for, I don't know, because you sold something to somebody and you need to ship that product to that customer, then of course you need the address, but you cannot use the address to sell to advertisers. You cannot use the address to, I don't know, make some map and
make a map
and yeah,
purpose, let's say.
exactly. But also from a security perspective, from a overall availability perspective, it makes sense to reduce the information you have, because the less information you have, the easier it is to secure. You need less resources. It just gives overhead if you want to collect everything. And well, there's always AI, and the more we have, the better the outputs and the algorithms we needed for the algorithms. But yeah, I read last week or a couple of weeks ago this study that said that well, just using everything you have for a specific question is not necessarily going to give you the best results. It's knowing what question you have and then deciding specifically what information you need, instead of just using that blob of information that will give you more precise results, because otherwise you get that overhead of irrelevant information, and there might be some bias in there. So it's more of a question of defining upfront what your purpose is, which is also in line with the whole privacy and data protection and compliance perspective, knowing the purpose. And then you will have better results, and it will be requiring less resources, easier to secure, and you have a more privacy preserving system.
Okay. And we're also, it takes time to for sure understand, from the big, I think it just requires more effort at the beginning of the project, or of the when you develop a big application, actually sit down and take it's, I mean, it's the same as with threat modeling on one side, privacy on another side. You said sit down, kind of model what you need, what you don't need, what different angles that you can go into. And you're also the author of the privacy threat modeling, right? So how does it actually help, to build secure applications?
Yes, yeah. So I'm a big fan of threat modeling, because it provides this structured approach to think about all the things that can go wrong, and you can do that up front, so you can indeed tackle early on all the things you want to avoid. And I think it's kind of the means, the vehicle that will guide you through the different steps of the development lifecycle. Because if upfront you identified what can go wrong, you create that, you turn that into requirements that you implement, so that you implement, but you also then know what you want to check for when you do your testing, when you do your verification. So it helps you, it guides you, it steers you throughout the different phases, by doing that indeed overhead upfront. About the overhead, there's so many different approaches to threat modeling on how to apply it. You can do an assessment of a couple of weeks if you really want to do a deep dive in a big system. You can do it in a couple of minutes if you have a really scoped, focused analysis for a specific feature, or in a couple of cycles. Well, I am, of course, going to highlight the LINDDUN privacy threat modeling framework because I created it, which, well, can be used in all kinds of ways. It can be a very formal, structured way to document everything very properly, following the LINDDUN categories, which are linking, identifying, non-repudiation, detecting, data disclosure, unawareness, and non-compliance. But you can use that. I hear a lot of people who use the cards to make it in a more kind of lean approach. So we have this threat cards, I think 34 or so, privacy threat cards that describe potential issues in a system that you can also use as a guide throughout your analysis, your discussion. You can just use the categories in the same way as Stride is often used, just as categories as guide. And you can, as I said before, you can use that very extensive, very rigorous, or you can use that just as some inspiration and scope and structure, and reduce your time, make a couple of iterations. And as I said before, if you just have that one question, like, do I really need this data? Then actually you're already threat modeling in a way, and start thinking about it. And so the more questions you ask, the more awareness you will also create. So if you repeat that threat modeling process, the people involved in that analysis, the developers, the designers, the security champions, they will become more aware of the questions you ask, and they will start asking those questions themselves. So you also add some awareness to the team by doing it. So if you repeat it, the privacy awareness grows, and you kind of slowly create all kinds of privacy champions within the team. It's not really a privacy champion yet.
I mean, maybe it's in the future, because security champion is becoming kind of
yes.
So I think maybe next step is going to be privacy champions.
Yes, that would be awesome. Yeah.
So you can be like a new advocate. I don't know, like I don't know if you know Dustin Lear, who is
absolutely. Yeah.
Security champions. So I think probably the next thing, and maybe there will be also a tool that helps developers to educate themselves on integrating privacy in their workflows. And there is potential. There is probably the potential for that in the future, because I think education starting, at least like now there is a reflection of integrating security thinking into development. There will be potentially also privacy thinking for the computer science student. And I think you've also been quite involved, in the education training part. I think you also mentioned you have to invest in your privacy engineering, that you don't kind of lag behind.
Yeah. So I think a half a year ago or so, there was this ISACA, not sure how to pronounce it, study on privacy trends, and so there was this big survey, and one of the outcomes was that there was even more a growing lack of privacy knowledge, and not just overall for privacy professionals, but specifically an even more a bigger gap for privacy engineering, specifically that technical skill, because a lot of people have kind of transformed into that privacy professional role. But not that many have a technical background. So they come from legal or from other areas, and that's awesome. But of course, we also need some people who have that privacy engineering skill, which is not just engineering or security engineering, though of course that's a great basis, but you need to add that privacy mindset, that says, well, we need to think about the individuals and unlinkability and transparency and control, and integrate those both perspectives, having that privacy part integrated into the engineering part. And that is where I think there's still, well, the study shows, but I also just see it in practice, there's still that big gap that I think is
The thing is
important
to
to
be at first. How did you get into privacy actually?
Oh yeah, so I have a computer science background. I have been a researcher at the university for years and years, and I actually started as security engineer, security researcher, doing security threat modeling, Stride. And I was in a project together with some privacy people who also had to do a privacy assessment, and they were looking at our assessment and going like, "You have a framework for that? That's awesome.
Okay.
We need something for privacy too." It's like, okay, let's bring everything together and let's just make it. And then I realized, well, this privacy thing, that's more challenging and more interesting than security. So I want to invest more in that. And then that kind of got the ball rolling. And yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, but that's it's amazing. I think like once you find out kind of something that you like occasionally by just trying to do that, I think that's kind of an example of something incredible, because I think it's very hard to find something what you specifically like for most of the people. So when you find it and you just get interested, it's incredible, and I think your mission was always like to actually raise privacy awareness and get organization, to embrace privacy engineering best practices. But like, what do you think is actually the biggest challenge in that, or like the difficulty in that?
Another good question. Yeah, so indeed, I love talking about it. That's why I love my job at the university, because that was kind of my job,
You
right?
just
To share. But I also feel very lucky that I can still do that now. In my new job in industry at PwC, I can spread awareness, but I can also help like our clients and really bring it into practice, and get a feeling indeed of the needs there. What is challenging, it's still very much a very case by case kind of situation. The maturity of companies is still very diverse, for privacy, but also for security. So the more advanced they are for security, the easier I feel it is to integrate privacy there, because if you already have that strong security practice, you can just plug in privacy. If you have threat modeling in place, well, you can extend it with a bit of privacy threat modeling, and if you then use that throughout the further steps, it kind of
just
flows through there. I might be making it sound a bit too easy, but that's basically the essence, right? I mean, if you have all that stuff in place, that's much more productive and more efficient if you then just integrate it, because privacy is often considered like this in isolation. Like, okay, we have this new requirement from the compliance people saying now we need to do privacy, but yeah, it's not a new thing. It's something to integrate. The biggest challenge I still see is getting that buy-in, I guess. Getting beyond that, let's do the minimal effort, because I see a lot of companies soon to hit a wall in, well, sure, they have the notices and the policies and the consents in place, but in practice, if you look at how the system handles the information, it's nowhere near where it should be, where they have to be. So convincing the organizations to actually invest in it, because, well, obviously it's not going well, but they still need to see it. That's a tricky part. And well, if I talk to security colleagues around the world, that's still sometimes a struggle to get that budget for security champions, for security all around, for those security practices, and for privacy even more so, of course, because security is still about, we were talking about this before, right, about protecting the company assets. Privacy is more about protecting the others. So you need a company that wants to invest in that reputation and that trust, and convincing organizations that if you build that trust through privacy and security, that gives you so much value, because that grows trust and from towards your customers and investors and all of that. But yeah, it's not
the challenge.
It's the integrating part, of course, that's challenging, but it's even before we get there, convincing them to do so, that is still yeah, we need more awareness.
So, for example, if someone wants to get a buy-in in their company, they're, let's say, a privacy engineer, or maybe even, maybe even a developer or security developer who just wants to focus more on their privacy. So, for them to get a buy-in, potentially, you would recommend to focus on trust, to kind of highlight, okay, if we increase the trust, it's potentially bring us more clients to the business. Are there any other points that you would recommend them?
Yeah, well, compliance always. Yeah, there was this study a year ago or 2 years ago by, I think it was Cisco, that also did a survey, and that showed that companies that invest in privacy on average get 2 to even 5 times the return on investment.
Mm.
So that means that it's worth it because, well, you invest in that trust, and that trust makes your company more interesting for investors, and that grows further. But I think the most convincing thing at the moment is still saying, if you don't do it and something goes wrong, you have a breach, or you get like this big audit, or I don't know, there's something goes wrong, and then you need to come in the open and say, well, we didn't really care. Then well, you have the breach, which is worse because you didn't invest in privacy and didn't minimize and didn't inform your individuals. So there will be the breach that has fallout, that has reputation damage, that has fines, and that has fines on top of fines because you didn't properly do the privacy. So unfortunately, it's often still by threatening, like, if you don't do it, it's going to be way worse. But yeah, I hope to evolve into that mindset where people are like, well, this makes sense, I want to do it, and not just like, oh,
I'll have to pay millions of euros or dollars because of the regulations. Do you think like regulations like GDPR are efficient enough?
Yeah, I think that answers it. I think they're a great starting point. They open the door for a lot of privacy opportunities, privacy projects. The enforcement is not fantastic yet, which makes a lot of companies be like, I mean, when was it, 2018, when it entered into force? Even at the university, we got so many questions from companies saying like, help us, they're coming after us. All the companies were like, they're coming after us. And then a year, 2 years further, and they went after Meta, and they went after Microsoft, and they went after the big ones. And now companies are kind of like, let's just,
they're never gonna vent out after us because we're just a small one.
So the fines might be a thing, but I don't think it's convincing enough yet. And yeah, I mean, I didn't get into privacy from a compliance perspective. I feel a bit silly thinking about it, but for a couple of years, I was working on privacy without actually making the link with legal, with compliance. It was just like, well, yeah, we have security and we have all these privacy properties, and they make sense to have both in a system. And then I was like, oh yeah, it doesn't just make sense. We actually need to do it from a legal perspective. So yeah, I'm working really hard to convince everybody to embrace that, and I think integrating it together with security is the most interesting step there, because it reduces the effort, the overhead so much, and you need both. So I
mean, I agree with you that you need both. If they're integrated, it's easier as well to justify it within the company and to sell, and especially with just so many things, like especially in application security, how rapidly everything is developing, how the applications are changing quickly with the rise of the AI within the past couple of years. For example, I think can be very interesting case to see its impact on the privacy as well, because let's say OpenAI API can now crawl, and it's just ChatGPT and stuff can now crawl actually different pages. And imagine if you're like marketplace that shows different information with your name as well, with what you're selling. So you're accessing actually so much data that can be used for AI training, that can be used for another purpose. And how do you think like this? What impact did it have, and how will it evolve?
Yeah, I think the AI progress and LLMs and all of that is amazing and awesome and giving so much opportunities, but also is going so fast that we are not fully aware of the security and privacy implications yet. So I'm kind of waiting for the big AI LLM breaches in the next couple of months or year that will highlight like maybe we went a bit too fast, because as you said, the crawling, that's like one of the privacy essentials, right? Using data for a different purpose than it was intended, or at least that imbalance of information. Before you had to, well, Google already helps a lot to find information, but still you have to look at all different resources yourself. Now you just type your question in ChatGPT or whatever LLM you're using, and it's within a second that you get information from everywhere. So there's this very big imbalance there. What information is being used in your LLMs, the prompts that you input that are also used to improve the future responses. Well, you might put some personal information in there. Additional things can be deduced from that. So from all different perspectives within that AI LLM story, there's security and privacy issues. I think you talked to Rob van der Veer, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he's the AI security and privacy guy there. But on the other hand, it can also probably give some nice things and help us, guide us.
For sure.
Like for threat modeling, for instance, give us some guidelines on how to structure our or privacy by design in general. If we can ask an LLM and AI system to assist us in what questions to ask, what properties to tackle, it's not going to fix everything for us, but it can help us provide information and guide us through certain things. As long as we are the same as we were for Google, being aware that if we Google something and you came on some shady page that probably you wouldn't consider it as good information, I think we still need to find a way to deal with that. Yeah, not always correct information we get from AI tools.
Oh yeah, for sure, and a lot of false information as well. Yeah, it takes. I mean, it will take time to. I don't think it will ever achieve, the state of perfection, and it will take time to firstly to understand all the implications, all the things that can happen, and then only address these gaps. And I always ask this question on the podcast, like for someone who, let's say, wants to just get started in privacy or privacy by design, or privacy threat modeling, what would be like concrete steps that you would recommend them to learn to do?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of resources out there. Good questions on where to get started. I think those essential three properties: unlinkability, transparency, intervenability are the essential building blocks. So start reading up more on what that is. There's a privacy by design principles created already in the mid-90s by Anke Vukian that list a couple of essential things you should do, being like not being reactive but proactive, taking a by default and by design perspective, putting the user first, those kind of things. Well, yeah, privacy threat modeling to me is a great thing to get started with. You have LINDDUN, you have Plot4AI, which is also a privacy, security, and ethics library for AI specific threats. There's a lot of different resources out there. Yeah, let me think about it, and I will give you a couple of resources to add in the show notes or something. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And one last question. What book would you recommend for someone to read on privacy topics?
I have a book ready here, but well, by accident, because I wasn't expecting this question. But it's not about privacy. It's about threat modeling, which is
okay.
the book by Isar and Matt, which is my go-to threat modeling resource, and that contains a lot of information on how to get started with threat modeling, different frameworks you have. There's also a couple specific to privacy in there, so there is a link to privacy. Okay. Another book for privacy is by Jaap Hoopman, a professor in the Netherlands who wrote a book on privacy is hard and other misconceptions. So that's also a very nice entry-level book. He also has this little booklet with privacy design strategies, which is also a great resource. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I'll share the links afterwards. I'll wait for links from you.
Yes.
As well. And well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really nice to learn a lot about the privacy, and I think for people who are listening to us, I really hope that they will now be maybe privacy champions.
Yes.
Who knows? Or will become eventually one, or educate their kids. We'll see in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this chat.